Fallout Equestria, Heroes, by no one. Chapter 35. Icarus. Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall.
Do it.
It was the first thing Flair said to me when I got back. He didn't ask where I'd been or what I'd done. Perhaps it was the look on my face, because nobody else did either.
I want to fly,
he said calmly, securely.
I need to fly. If I can't fly, what good am I?
I was going to point out what good he was, and how I would still be his friend and other such heartwarming crap, but he cut me off.
Don't contradict me, just let me.
Are you sure? I was so sure at first he'd want to, but now I was second-guessing myself.
It worked for you, right? An earth pony without legs is like a Pegasi without wings.
He looked visibly pained just saying those words. Either that or he was pained from the pain. His chest rose heavily as he sucked in air between his teeth.
What's my pride compared to the sky?
Nothing, I suggested, but I wasn't really sure. I'd never really been a big fan of flying, or heights, but he enjoyed it, and that's what mattered.
Nothing,
he agreed. He looked down at Serenity.
You sure you can do this?
The filly nodded excitedly.
Of course. I got all the equipment here I need. I just need time, Don't worry about it.
She looked over at me and pointed an accusatory hoof.
You either. Hay said she needed you, so if y'all need running stuff, don't worry about it. It's all handled here. Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
I wasn't really sure what lemons had to do with it, but she seemed confident. Okay. I leaned down and nuzzled her cheek softly. I'm not sure what Hayes wants, but we'll be back as soon as possible. Serenity waved me away with a dismissive hoof. I couldn't help but think she was slightly overplaying how nonchalant she was feeling.
And you,
she said, turning back to the injured Pegasus still lying on the sterile hospital bed.
I think you made the right choice.
Yeah,
he sighed, leaning back on the bed. He wasn't even looking at me, just staring up at the ceiling as if it held all the answers he needed. I didn't want to interfere, though, and I had no doubt that I would if I stayed. There was still work to be done, too. I needed to transfer control of the Ponytrons to the finishers like I had promised, and then do whatever Hayes had planned. Luckily, she wasn't hard to find, considering I bumped into her as soon as I left the hospital room.
Oh, we were waiting for you, she said cheerfully. We think we have been able to devise a spell as you desired.
That was fast, like incredibly so. Perhaps I should have expected more from Hayes considering her vast magical talent. You can neutralize the orb? She nodded.
We have searched our memories and knowledge, and we believe we know a spell that when placed on a container would essentially cause the orb's magical effects to be reflected. It would be incredibly powerful inside the container, but the walls of the container would continuously reflect it so the magical field would be unable to exit.
I said. I wasn't entirely sure any of that made sense, but she looked incredibly confident about it, so I knew better than to question her, especially considering how little I knew about magic. I thought your horn got worn out, though. She nodded and sighed, lowering her head.
We are afraid we did not think that through. Considering the large amounts of magical radiation that has been expelled outside, if we were to stand at ground zero, we would quickly gain back our magical strength.
What about your wing? I said, looking over at the wing in question. Even folded against her body, it didn't look right, twisting at an odd angle that made my stomach tie in knots.
It has already healed incorrectly,
she stated simply, not bothering to look past it.
It can be healed properly, but the process will be painful, and we lack the time for such an endeavor. For now, additional radiation will not harm it any more than it already has been. The damage is done, and all we can do is accept that fact and continue on until an opportunity to fix it presents itself.
You, aren't upset?
We, were never proficient at flying. It was pleasant, but not something we cannot live deprived of. As well, we are confident that we will be able to heal ourselves in time, as we are very resilient. If anything, we are more upset for Flair, if our shield hadn't failed.
You can't blame yourself for that. She looked conflicted for a minute, but let out a sigh.
We shall endeavor not to, but it can be difficult. Even if he is granted the gift of flight through artificial means, we recognize it will not be the same, as you can attest to.
could I? On rare occasion, I had briefly flirted with the angst that came with finding bits and pieces of you lopped off and replaced with cold metal, but for the most part, I took it in stride. I accepted what happened and moved on. I didn't look back on that, at least, with too much regret. Maybe if I had some sort of defining feature that had been removed, then maybe I could understand. The only thing appreciably close was my eye, for which I still wore an eye patch most of the time, but my, feelings towards that was not on loss, but, regret. Still, I was in no position to contradict her, so I smiled and agreed. Yeah, it is, weird. That was true, at least. We should go, though. The Watchers are not pleased with me. Our time in the city might be short. If we want to get everything done, we need... I searched for the appropriate term. Concurrent activity.
Yes, that is wise.
When I left the BS, I commanded some ponytrons to follow me as I walked down the main strip toward the gate that separated Dais from Parasite Mound. I wasn't sure how I was going to find photo finish in Parasite Mound, so the next best thing was to create a big enough scene to have her find me. This, of course, involved going past the remnants of the moon, a fact I hadn't considered. It was, odd seeing the city without the building, a fact that was hard to get over, especially as I drew closer to the rubble. If I looked closely enough, I swore parts of the rubble even looked familiar, pieces of the facade of the building that stuck out like I swore I could remember. Or maybe it was my imagination, trying to find sense in the senselessness, a pattern in the chaos. I hadn't expected the giant crater, though, when I really should have. Much of the underground had been destroyed, and the wreckage of the upper building had fallen in, creating sinkholes of rubble, even less safe than a normal knockdown building. The crater was massive enough that buildings to the left, right, and behind the moon, well, those that hadn't also been reduced to rubble, were tilted, sliding towards the remains. I wondered how the tunnels fared underneath. No doubt the massive explosion did damage, and I was suddenly struck by the realization that ponies could be trapped underneath by cave-ins. This thought was prompted by the fact that I could see many ponies digging with their hooves through the rubble. They were far enough away I couldn't make out faces, but they looked dirty, maybe blood-stained, as they risked their lives. How many ponies had been trapped in the building when it went down? The remainder of the Mustangs were there for sure, and the invading revolutionary forces. Was this what the Watchers planned? To weaken the revolutionaries and Mustangs both with this attack, forcing them to fall back to them? Did it matter? Platinum Haze looked down at me, sadness in her eyes. It hadn't even been a full day since the explosion, but the ponies looked so weary. I could tell how much she cared. Well, go. My pit buck had been ticking ever since I got outside, but I chose not to worry about it. But the closer to ground zero, it ticked faster, so she could help and heal, if there was any pony left there to help. Wait, I said as she took a few steps. I searched through my bags and pulled out all the rataways and radex I had. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. For them. She nodded, and I watched as she walked over the rubble gracefully. Okay, it wasn't so graceful, as she tripped a few times, but it still made for an impressive image when all the gathering ponies stopped to watch her in awe. They looked shocked, and one of them drew a weapon, but when she helped to dig, they all implicitly understood and went back to their work. I watched for a minute before looking down at my pit buck. It only took a few clicks before the ponytrons that made up my entourage rolled away from me and towards the rubble. Their wheels made it difficult, but they would have to do, at least for now. The ponies working accepted that too in turn, though they were more careful to keep their distance from the robot than from the alicorn. I could have gone and helped myself, and perhaps I should have, but there was other work to be done, and I had to take it one step at a time. There wasn't time to help every single pony who needed it, not if I still wanted to help every pony by creating a safer city. It was weird having that as a goal. It was so far-fetched, so out there, and nearly impossible to achieve, not to mention stupidly naive and optimistic. Still, it was my goal, and if I took it one step at a time... Eventually, I made my way to the gate to find ponytrons still guarding it. Unsurprisingly, they let me pass without issue, which really made sense considering I still had absolute control over them. I took a few steps into Parasite Mound to find it mostly dead and quiet. My pit buck was still ticking off steadily, so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. I could only hope the finishers had enough medicine to keep their people alive a little longer. And it didn't take long for me to find out the answer when a rainbow-colored suit of power armor leapt from a building in front of me.
We've been waiting.
Screenshot. I recognized the voice even through the filter. Not for long, I hope. She didn't seem to be in a very good mood by the way her body was hunched over like a cat ready to pounce.
Long enough,
The voice said sharply.
another explosion. We've barely recovered from the last.
She wasn't even patient enough to do the accent. That was a little disappointing. Then maybe I can help your mood. I held up my pit buck. I have the command codes for every ponetron in the city. Even through the bug mask, I could tell her eyes went wide. Her stressed posture instantly became more relaxed, though not too much.
Dare I ask how?
One step at a time. Best not, I said. I licked my lips nervously. But remember the deal.
Follow your master plan, was it?
You could almost hear the sarcastic air quotes around the master plan. Not that I could blame her. Yes, I sucked in a deep breath. Control them carefully. Help with them as you can, but nothing overt. Do not tip your hoof that they belong to you. She looked at me carefully. It made me a bit nervous.
Until when?
Until? That was a good question. A question I should have thought about long before. Until I say otherwise. Week, maybe less. That's all it would take, if everything worked out. If I could decide on all the things that I needed to work out. There were a lot of ifs involved, but I figured the longest I could force the finishers to wait before they got impatient was a week, so that was the time frame I would go with.
And what's to stop us from ignoring you?
Screenshot said, and I had to admire her honesty, if nothing else. Nothing, so I matched honesty with honesty. Except I got it for you. You didn't believe I could, and here I am. If nothing else, I deserve a little bit of trust. The power-armored pony seemed to regard me suspiciously before taking a step forward and fiddling with her hoof and pulling out a long wire near her ankle.
Plug this into your pit buck,
She said, giving me the end of the wire, and I obliged.
The finishers are choosing to trust you.
She said simply. My pit buck beeped, and I looked down to see a series of files and programs being deleted or moved. There were a few warnings, and I clicked through them without really reading. It was more important to get this done quickly before anybody noticed. It is done, I said when it finished, unplugging the wire from my pit buck. Enjoy your new army. Screenshot nodded, and I moved to turn, but she stopped and looked at me seriously.
When I first met you, you were a random merc with an attitude problem. Now I don't know what you are. Do you really think whatever your plan is will work?
No, I thought. Yes, I said.
May Celestia grant you wisdom then.
She bowed her head and ran off. I stood there for a minute, just long enough to feel drops of rain start to fall on my head. Looking up, I could see an angry arrangement of gray clouds blowing in from the north. Another storm was coming, but there was still time to do what needed to do without getting too wet. The rain was still a light drizzle when I found my way back to the wreckage of the moon. Platinum Haze was not hard to find in the wreckage, the way her body seemed to shimmer and glow, and the fact that she was several inches taller since the last time I saw her. It was amazing the effects radiation had on her.
We are sorry.
She said when she walked back up to me.
How long have you been waiting for us?
Not very, I said. It was easy to forget, with everything that had been going on, just how beautiful Haze was. But it struck me at that moment. Perhaps it was the way her mane was frazzled, or her face flecked with dirt from her work. I was never good at articulating such things, so I let it go. Has your magic returned?
We believe so.
I'd been about to ask if she'd found any survivors, but I was already quite certain of the answer, so I didn't bother bringing the mood down.
We are ready. We are fairly certain this will work.
Okay. If there's time, you can come back up to help, I said, turning to walk away, letting Haze pad up beside me.
Thank you.
It was quiet for a while, and I imagine that was for the best as we both had a lot to think about. Still, it wasn't exactly unpleasant, except for the growing sickly feeling in my stomach the longer I stayed outside. Luckily, we made it to the tunnels in short order, using the same entrance I had used before to find Walkirk, though this time there seemed to be no guards. Not that I minded. I didn't feel the need to talk to them again. It didn't take long to find our way down to the half-finished dirt tunnel in the very bowels of the tunnels. It felt like as soon as my hooves touched dirt, I could hear the whispering of the winds. I needed something to distract myself from the memories that always seemed to come near pieces of Simple Heart, and luckily Platinum Haze helped with that.
May we ask, what is your plan?
It was a good thing to ask. It helped me think. The wind wasn't wrong in this case. I'm not sure. She seemed to deflate, so I guess that wasn't the answer she was looking for. The Watchers need to be stopped, but I'm not sure they can be. The city is little more than ash now. Their goal is to make it rise from the ashes, but in their image. I took a sharp breath. So, I'll stop that.
How?
It was a good question, and it was the sort of question that gnawed at the edge of my consciousness because I knew I didn't have a full answer. Not yet. By turning the people against them. That was the gist of it. Revealing them for what they are, showing a better alternative. If the finishers and Molly can work together. The plan was always sort of murky in my head, but as I walked, it started to take shape, piece by piece. Then maybe I need to undermine them. Then it was gone again, back into a formless fog in my head.
But why Simple Heart?
She asked curiously, with a hint of nervousness in her voice. After the last time she was visited by that orb, I couldn't blame her for not wanting to deal with it again. He holds the mountain. There's so many supplies there, I said. I could picture it. Stacks and stacks of lumber and metal and tools and so much else in the main room alone. The facility had so much, and if I could get it. We could rebuild the city, I said.
We understand. How better to win the trust of those in the city by endeavoring to rebuild it with a plethora of supplies?
I smiled when she put words to what I was trying to think of.
It will be a dangerous endeavor, but we imagine that will be our next destination.
It has to be. I looked down the darkened tunnel. Sliding the eye patch off my face provided a little light, but in an eerie green glow that didn't help matters. I knew what was down there. I could never forget. And I felt it tickling at the base of my neck the closer I got. We will want to be rid of that as soon as possible.
We agree.
She looked around the darkened tunnels nervously, her horns light doing little to penetrate the darkness that enveloped us.
We are certain our spell will work, but still.
She shuddered.
We can hear her. We dislike this feeling.
Her? I asked curiously, ignoring my own voices. Just keep moving.
Mother.
Right. Her.
She is telling us not to be afraid. And then she tells us we should be afraid, and that she loves us, and for us to run.
Her gaze darkened, and I could see the barest hint of a scowl forming on her face.
We do not like this place. You can't keep doing this. You can't ignore.
The voices on the wind chimed in, but I wasn't sure if it was talking to me or Hayes. It'll be over soon, I said. It was getting strong, the whispering and the sounds. Images flashed in the corner of my eye, but I didn't dare look. I knew there was nothing good to be found when searching for ghosts. Yet, they still found me. And where once only one voice whispered, now many spoke louder and louder until I could hear nothing else. I looked at Hayes frantically, my heart racing to see her mouth moving, but nothing came out. Just the roar of winds in my ears like a hurricane.
We must purge the evil from the cunts.
A lot of them, everyone. Let them fucking burn.
What is the nature?
It was a matter of time.
The wasteland can't be saved by heroes, only by ponies. Ponies like me. In the darkness, I could see him. See his stupid fucking grin. He was smoke in the blackness, a vague apparition, but somehow so solid I could see the color of his eyes. I charged forward. He had to die again. I wouldn't let Serenity finish the job this time. It would be me. But when I charged into the darkness, his form faded and shifted around me.
Took you long enough. You're already dead.
He's dead. I saw him die. Bullet through the head, bang, done. I could almost taste the blood splatter. But then why was he still haunting me?
You're gonna die of failure.
Shut up! I yelled. Another voice. Another apparition. More wind in my ears. All dead. I saw them all die. And they keep coming back one after another. I won't! They're dead. What do they know? They're all dead. They can't stop me.
I thought it was a trick. They killed me. Like you.
More and more, the dead started to rise from the ground, their visages made from fog and smoke, but I knew the dead all by name.
I never wanted this
The
job.
small ghost said. I could hear the snare in its voice.
You killed me for it. Never saw you coming. Never saw you
The
coming.
ghost made of green smoke said, and kept saying even as I swept my hoof through her.
Never had a chance. They came. They call her a hero now. My murderer. I see, but nobody remembers.
What is the nature?
A final ghost said, standing before me as the others grew and circled. He didn't have to finish the question. I knew the question as well as I knew anything, but I still didn't have an answer for him. Living or dead, he continued to mock me.
So many dead.
Another ghost said,
Time and again. We must do better. Why can't you see? You want to be a hero. Fucking hero they call me. A hero I shall be.
This is not the time for heroes. Give up.
They wouldn't stop talking. They circled around me and spoke and spoke and spoke until I could hear no more. Their words became a jumble of memories I had forgotten, the words I could barely discern. The smoke circled, and slowly the ghosts merged with each other just as their words did, leaving me in a prison of fog and guilt.
Survive.
A single voice pierced through the fog like a knife, the voice I knew all too well. A red form strode through my swirling fog cage, a smile on its ghostly lips. The first ghost. The last.
No, not you. Not again. Survive.
The voice said. And all at once the fog faded. I blinked. The fog was gone. The ghosts were gone. The voices were gone. The only thing I could see was the dim image of Platinum Haze standing before me, holding my hoof in hers. Before I could say anything, she leaned down to kiss me, and I felt blood rushing to my cheeks.
Haze, it is done.
She lifted up a sack in her magic, and I could sense the orb inside, but its power was gone, shielded by the spells Haze had cast.
We are sorry you had to go through that, but it shall not happen again.
I'm sorry, I said at once.
I let it. You are a silly mare.
She leaned down and kissed my cheek this time.
We love you. We would never blame you for this horrendous magic. Let us go now and never speak of this place henceforth.
We did it. I couldn't help but feel a sense of elation as we left the tunnels. My plans were starting to come to fruition, as sketchy and vague as they were. One step at a time, we were making progress, and I was sure the harder part would come when trying to bargain with Simpleheart for a piece of his soul, but when we last spoke he seemed so enamored with the idea. But forgetting all that, how could I not be happy that it worked? We beat those tunnels. Ever since the first time I entered them, when the winds whispered and I shivered and everything felt ill at ease, I thought they were unbeatable, another blot on my memory I couldn't erase. That came back every time the winds blew. But they were gone. Not the tunnels, obviously, but what made them so dark and terrifying. They belonged to me now, and they would never torment another living soul. It made me want to laugh, or cry, but mostly it just put a goofy smile on my face.
You appear to be elated,
Platinum Haze said as we surfaced in the slums of the city. Of course, I could skip. Everything was going so right.
We are happy that you are happy. Recently you have seemed very despondent, and we wished it were not so. You look so much more beautiful when you smile.
I wasn't sure how to answer that. I'm not beautiful, smile or not. You don't have to lie to me.
Many things are beautiful, my dear.
She looked down the road to where the BS was, waiting for us, shining like a diamond amidst the empty ruins.
The sun rising above the wasteland, the laughter of children. Pretty mares, to be sure, but not just that. You are not conventionally pretty, but do not sell yourself short. You have a strength and determination about you that is attractive, and you would do well to remember that.
I had enough grace to blush. Thanks.
And what beauty you have is your own,
she said solemnly, but I wasn't really sure what she meant at first. Eventually I figured it out, but only after a long, drawn-out silence in which time we had reached the main door of the BS.
Haze,
I really should have thought of a cutesy nickname for her, but I was really bad at such things. Maybe Serenity had some idea. You, would be beautiful even if you never became an alicorn. I love you because of your heart, not your looks. I paused. I mean, the looks aren't bad either. Just don't think, we know. She leaned down to kiss me on the nose. Another blush. Great.
We are just feeling sorry for ourselves, a hobby we have practice at. We are sorry if it has caused you distress.
You need to stop apologizing, I said, stepping through the door and into the BS. I had nearly forgotten I had sent people inside the casino to escape the radiation, but as soon as I opened the door, I was reminded. There were even more ponies there than when I left earlier that same day. Nearly 24 by my count, and those were just the ones I could see on the casino floor. They all looked sick, or old, or injured, but were doing their best trying to make living spaces out of the old camp that had sprouted when the first megaspell went off. And they all stared at me as I entered. I was used to getting stared at, to be sure. I was freakishly tall and strong, and my cybernetics or scars tended to make an interesting first expression. But they weren't looking at me with fear or revulsion or curiosity. They were wide-eyed, like they adored me or something. A few muttered things I could barely make out as I walked by in silence, but it sounded like thanks or maybe a prayer. I didn't get it. Why would they care about me? I didn't create the BS or the spells that kept it safe. All I did was show them the way. But some of them looked at me as if I had saved them from some great tragedy. I hated it. Platinum Haze loving me was one thing, but this sudden outpouring from people I didn't know for trivial things just bothered me. I wasn't a good pony. I was a murderer and worse, and they acted like I saved well, I did save their lives from the radiation technically, but not in any overt way. Still, they had no reason to like me. I wasn't a pony used to being liked.
They need some pony to look to,
Platinum Haze said to me as we climbed the steps toward the hospital ward.
They should find some pony else,
I muttered, my good mood turning sour for what I admit was a fairly petty reason.
Who?
I hated it when she was all sensible like that, but she was right. The city was at a loss for people to look up to. The revolutionaries had their leader, but he was probably dead now, along with how many of their people. Some looked to the Watchers, but they caused the mess, and eventually the people would realize that they were doing nothing to solve it. Pinprick was dead. The Batmare was dead. So who was left?
No pony noticed me before, I replied eventually.
How many ponies did you save before?
Another uneasy question.
You're my mere friend,
I sputtered in disbelief as we finally reached the surgery room where Flare and Serenity were.
You're supposed to take my side.
We are. We simply think you have not chosen your side properly.
She smiled, but I couldn't tell if she was being sincere or mocking me. With a huff, I turned and opened the door. Blood. So much blood. On the floor, on the walls, on Serenity, all over Flare. I had never seen so much blood come from a living pony.
Serenity?
She wasn't looking at me. She was scrambling over tools frantically. When she heard her name, she looked up, her gray eyes bloodshot and red and drenched with tears.
It's not working,
she screamed, choking back sobs.
There was bits left. I had to cut them out, but I cut too deep, and there was blood, and I tried to attach the limb, but I stopped, but I can't. It's not working.
She sobbed pitifully.
I fucked up.
I looked from my crying daughter down to Flare, who was barely conscious on the table, his eyes open but glazed over. The heart rate monitor was beating rapidly, and his body covered in blood.
I let this happen. I should have supervised. Fuck.
Okay, calm. Don't panic. Deep breath. This was my fault. Serenity had no knowledge of Pegasus anatomy. No matter how well versed in medicine and cybernetics she was, this was uncharted territory. I couldn't be mad. I needed to... Okay, plan.
How bad is it?
I walked in as calmly as I could, checking over the unmoving Flare to see if he had any wounds that Serenity hadn't managed to fully close. Serenity wiped her eyes, but seemed to recognize the seriousness in my tone and replied,
He lost a lot of blood, including what he lost earlier. Like maybe a third, maybe more.
Okay, a third wasn't good.
I think he needs a blood transfusion, but I can't find any in...
Platinum Haze chimed in.
It is our understanding that it would not be possible to find compatible blood here, as Pegasi, benefiting from their unique physiological structure, have a vastly different blood type.
We need Pegasi blood.
Okay, that was a problem. I looked down at Flare and swore under my breath at how pale he looked as I placed a hoof on his forehead to check his temperature. I had no idea what I was supposed to do with the information I got, but it seemed like the thing to do. Pegasi blood, I said.
We may have an answer for that.
Serenity and I both looked over at Platinum Haze anxiously.
It is our understanding that Enclave ships are equipped with medbays to deal with traumatic injuries.
My eyes turned to the window in the room. It was hidden by window shades, but I knew what was beyond it in the sky, hovering over the city like a metaphorical and literal black cloud, the Raptor. All right, I said. No point in arguing the point. Flare had to live, and for him to live he needed blood, and this was the only option available to us. No point arguing or figuring out how, just go. The Enclave home base is an old high-rise apartment building, I said. I remembered that much. It was the setting of Flare's dream that I visited. If they work with the Watchers, and I was sure that they do, they might have a dock, or we can threaten some Pegasi.
Mama, how? It's dangerous. I can't. What if something happens? We can't leave Flare?
Serenity had stopped crying, but it seemed only barely. Right, so we'll take him with us. Serenity looked up at me bleary-eyed. I had to stay calm, think one step ahead. It doesn't matter what happened. All that matters is now we do what we can to help him. Feeling sorry for yourself can come later.
But...
No buts. You're the sneakiest. Platinum Haze could turn invisible, but she was clumsy and loud and large, so having her infiltrate a building with a lot of narrow hallways would not work out well. We need you. If we all want to get through untouched, you need to go through first. Find out which areas are used, which aren't, and how we can get onto the ship. It was a lot to put on the filly, but it was our best chance. She sniffled and nodded.
Okay.
There was no time to debate or worry. It was one thing, then another. Make a quick decision and follow through with intensity. That was how I was going to make sure Flare was all right. The rain was coming down harder once we got outside, and there was a boom of thunder in the distance. I didn't mind so much getting wet, but it meant that Hayes' invisibility would be less effective. The wind was also obnoxious. The way it blew my mane into my face reminded me how much I needed to get it cut. But those were worries for another day, far down my list of priorities. It didn't take long for us to get to the apartment building on the south side of the city. It was basically across the street from the Watcher HQ, which made me uncomfortable. Luckily, the ambient radiation all around us provided Hayes with more than enough magical energy to keep us mostly invisible. Still, we were careful not to get too close as we waited for Serenity to return. I didn't like the idea of sending her in there alone, but I couldn't really think of another option. We needed Pegasus blood to help Flare from dying, and this was the only way to get it quickly. And charging in there guns blazing with Flare lying limp on my back simply wasn't an option. So I had to rely on her, but if she wasn't back quickly, I had already resolved to turn the building into a crater to get her back. I was not a patient mare after all. Luckily, I did not have to wait long out in the rain, as it took less than 20 minutes for Serenity to slink back to us. I didn't even notice her arrival until she suddenly said, "There's no way onto that ship." I nearly jumped before I realized who it was. I didn't bother asking how she managed to sneak up on us. "What do you mean?" "There's no bridge or anything. We can't just walk on." Her mane was matted to her face from the rain, but she didn't seem to mind. "There has to be a way onto the ship," I said. I looked up at the sky to find the Raptor. It was hard to see, as it blended into the dark clouds filling the sky, but the bits of metal that stuck out gave it away. Once I found it, it seemed to dominate the entire sky. If we were to walk under it, I bet we'd stay dry. "Without having wings," I clarified. "Well, She looked around thoughtfully. "I found a new map on the wall that they use. There's some sort of taxi service near the top for injured ponies or people visiting, but we need to get to some point to fly us. All the air vehicles I saw need a Pegasi to fly them." I gave a stern nod. "Right, so we take a hostage." Serenity looked at me, uncertainty clear in her gray eyes, but when Flare moaned in pain on my back, it seemed her mind was made up. I can lead us there. Just follow me." So I did. She led us around the building to a small door near the back with a computer lock that took her 3 seconds to hack through. Though I imagine she had already done that earlier, so it was less hacking and more waiting for it to work. Regardless of the specific, the door slid open, revealing the revamped apartment building. It was an interesting experience to walk into the building and realize it was all familiar. Though the hallway was dimly lit and clearly not used often, I recognized its metal walls and the sliding doors used for every room. I had been there once, in a dream, and being there in reality brought a strange sense of déjà vu. I took a few more steps in and shook off the odd feeling. I had to keep moving, one step at a time, and Serenity was already rushing forward, her horn glowing pink as she walked. It was an uneventful walk, to be honest, as half of the Enclave forces had abandoned the building during their civil war, and many of the new Enclave recruited after their disastrous war in the north preferred the comfort of their Raptor to a ground-bound building. Though, I imagine that without Serenity scouting earlier, it would have been a lot more perilous with me and Hayes bumbling around. We eventually found our way to the top of the building, and found ourselves outside a simple-looking door with the word docks hastily spray-painted over it, and the sound of wind whistling through the cracks of the doorframe. I carefully placed Flair onto Hayes' back, and kicked down the damn door. The poor Pegasus on the other side was so surprised he dropped his weapon and stumbled onto his ass. I suppose it might have been a little bit of an overkill to send the door flying across the room and off the side of the building. "What are—" the Pegasus started. I wasted no time in shoving the point of my gun down his throat. "Shut up," I said venomously. "I don't want to hurt you." I kicked his MEW rifle across the floor and took a quick look around the room. It seemed the top floors of the building had fared poorly, collapsing in on themselves and leaving only a little hallway that led to the door we entered intact. So the room was more of a roof with the barest hint that walls had ever existed before. The majority of the floor was covered with various vehicles, though most looked like wagons with overlarge engines, but there was one metal monstrosity that reminded me of a turtle. Nothing on the floor looked as sleek as the vertibuck I had used before, but that was probably too much to ask for. "Do they work?" I asked the buck, who was still gaping at me from the floor. "Only one guard for all these vehicles. They must have been the dregs of whatever fleet the Enclave possessed." The buck nodded his head slowly, then shook. Scrunching up his muzzle, he slowly and quietly started to speak, as if he was worried doing so would incur my wrath. I never did take a good look at the buck before. He didn't seem the Army type, but I suppose the Enclave took what it could get. He was all skin and bones, with dark pink eyes, a mop of messy green mane, and a stupid-looking jumpsuit on. Judging by the grease still on his nose, he was probably a mechanic who got guard duty. A shame for him. The stallion gulped. Well, he was barely more than a foal, perhaps 15 if I had to guess. Some. Well, but I mean, why?" I never did take a good look at the buck before. He didn't seem the Army type, but I suppose the Enclave took what it could get. He was all skin and bones, with dark pink eyes, a mop of messy green mane, and a stupid-looking jumpsuit on. Judging by the grease still on his nose, he was probably a mechanic who got guard duty. A shame for him. "I need to fly." The stallion gulped. Well, he was barely more than a foal, perhaps 15 if I had to guess. "Well, I mean, can't fly you, on account of you breaking down my door and probably being an enemy." That seemed like a reasonable enough statement, but it really wasn't on the table. "I'm nobody's enemy." That was a lie, so I followed it up. "So as long as they aren't mine, where do you stand?" "I don't even know you," the pony said stubbornly. "I could yell, people would hear, they'd come kill you." "But you're not going to. You're going to fly me and my friends to the Raptor." "Why? You'll die." The pony frowned. "Besides, you can't make me." That's so, I thought. "Hayes, Serenity." The two of them entered the room at my word, Hayes still faintly glowing from the amount of radiation she had consumed. "Get strapped up to the best wagon, kid. We are going." The stubborn boy was about to complain again until he saw the body draped over Hayes' back, and his pink eyes went wide. "Uncle, what did you do to my uncle?" "Uncle? You mean Flair?" Serenity said, walking over to the boy confidently. "I call him that sometimes, but he ain't really." The boy bolted to his hooves. "He is, for real. He's my dad's younger brother. What'd you do to him?" The kid really needed to stop talking so loudly, as well as stop asking questions that were difficult to answer. "We are trying to help him," I said. I found the best way to get around a difficult question was to ignore it. He lost a lot of blood. He needs more medical stuff, but we didn't have the right blood. The boy scrunched up his muzzle and turned sharply away from us to half-dash towards the nearest sky wagon. Wordlessly, he strapped himself to it and looked over at the three of us expectantly. I suppose that must have convinced him well enough that we weren't going to kill him. So, we climbed onto the vehicle and prayed the boy wasn't leading us to danger. Flair, as it turned out, had 4 siblings, 3 brothers and 1 sister, which totaled a half-dozen nieces and 3 nephews, along with more uncles, aunts, and cousins than I cared to count. It seemed that with dwindling numbers, the Enclave remnants were, very passionate about breeding. A fact that was a bit of a shock to me. Flair mentioned family rarely, and the few times he did, I am pretty sure contradicted themselves. The boy who helped us didn't have an explanation for us as we traveled, but when he called his father up in secret as we landed, we figured it out. Flair's brother had a similar color to him, though his coat was light green, not blue, and the colors in his mane were swapped.
Flair's a liar,
the large stallion said. He called himself Flash, and he was about half a head taller than his brother, thicker of body, and about 10 years older, judging by the way he was starting to go bald. He also had a booming laugh, which was uncomfortably loud considering we were sneaking onto his ship.
Stars and lies are all one and the same, as my bro has always been good at both. He ever tell you about the time he convinced our mom that it was my sister who accidentally set fire to his room?
He never mentioned it, I said, unsure. He never mentioned you at all, was what I wanted to say, but it seemed awkward.
His room wasn't even burnt.
The stallion laughed again, his voice echoing through the halls of the Raptor.
Mom never trusted him again, goddess keep his soul. Can't blame her neither.
He was surprisingly unworried about his brother's bloodstained state. A fact Serenity, ever blunt, decided to bring up.
He's hurt,
she said, rushing toward the stallion.
You need help.
Have no fear, little one.
When the stallion smiled, it was easy to see he was missing teeth.
I am a doctor. He's not in any danger of bleeding out, I can tell, and he would want us to laugh. He always wants every pony to laugh.
My dad is the best medic in the Enclave. Don't let any poet tell you different,
the boy who flew us up to the Raptor said. Apparently, his name was Rain Dance, and he had a sister who was clearing the way for us called Moon Dancer. Ponies love their themed names.
Are you sure?
Serenity had some medical training I knew, and had saved my life on occasion, but she was young still and not a doctor by far, yet part of me trusted her a lot more than this stranger who claimed he was a brother to my friend.
Trust me,
Flash said. It was the same thing his son had said when he flew us up to the ship. Instead of flying us to the main dock, we were flown to a clouded wall of the ship and told to jump through. Trust me, he said. I made the jump, but I was certain it was a trick that was going to kill us. But it didn't, so perhaps this large stallion was worthy of some small measure of trust.
We kindly thank you for your assistance in this matter,
Platinum Haze said serenely.
We did not know Flair had siblings, but we are grateful for your help.
Proud to help. I have never seen one of your kind before. I would help just to see your beautiful smile.
Platinum shuffled awkwardly as the stallion thankfully continued by changing course.
And Flair has always been, difficult. Him and Father don't get along, not since Mom died. They had a falling out, and when his, preferences came to light, my father took it poorly. Our family was loyal to the Enclave, he said, and loyal families should breed before the ground pounders drowned us out. Meaning no offense.
None taken? I was unsure how that was not offensive, but I wasn't in the arguing mood to be sure.
We haven't seen much of him since. Gosh, he was just a bit older than my colt.
The colt frowned.
I'm not a colt. Besides, he always showed up for my birthdays telling jokes. I just thought he was too busy. Grandfather said he was some sort of super soldier.
I had to laugh. Well, it was more of a snort, but the idea was there.
Special operations,
Flash said.
My dad was proud of him for that at least, though he would never admit it. More than he was of me for going into medicine. He never knew how much it killed Flair, though. I could see it inside his eyes. Something happened, and ever since, it felt like all his jokes were forced.
He didn't know about what happened. Considering the distance Flair kept from his family, I shouldn't have been surprised that he never mentioned the Bitter Steel event to them. I wondered if they would still help him if they knew about the foals he killed. Accident or no, it wasn't something that could be overlooked. I bit my lip and held my tongue.
War touches us all,
Platinum said quietly.
It is best we do not dwell on it.
No doubt, which is why I stay far from it. Oh, I've been in scraps, but I avoid all the gunfire and death.
He smiled broadly, still showing his missing teeth.
Told my kids the same thing. 2 of them listened.
He looked down at his son, who was smiling back up at him.
The last didn't, though. She was determined to put her best hoof forward for the Enclave. She's a sniper now.
If y'all aren't worried, why are you working for the Bad Enclave?
Serenity demanded. The Colt looked confused, but Flash just grimaced.
Didn't even know what it was until the lasers started firing. It wasn't my choice, but we're stuck here now.
The stallion shrugged.
We defy them in our own small way, but we still want to live. My sister and her kids are stuck here too, but one of my brothers escaped, and the other...
He sighed long and deep.
The battle was nasty. We never got Fury's remains, but High Command here tells us he died a hero.
Flash spat.
What good is a hero? He had a wife and 3 little fillies. What heroism will bring their father back? I told him, 1,000 times I told him not to take up arms, to look at the way it broke Flair, but he was determined to follow his big brother. I don't begrudge Flair, it's not his fault Fury wanted to be a hero, but it still hurts.
I never knew Uncle Fury much. He was always busy, even on birthdays, but Dad told me a lot about him,
Rain Dancer explained.
Why brood over such things? You brought my brother home so I can help him at least. You better have a good joke for me, though.
He was taking the whole thing better than I would have, or he was simply hiding his pain, which was something I could relate to. It didn't take long for his daughter to reach us, peeking into the small supply closet we had hidden in. Moon Dancer was a skinny wisp of a thing, but obscenely tall to the point she could almost look me eye to eye. Her mane was short-cropped and styled in such a way it covered one of her eyes, and she seemed to be smiling constantly, as if some pony just told a joke that she only got. Teenagers were wont to do that, I found.
Path should be clear, Daddy. Everyone's busy with the big move, but we should hurry. Your friends aren't inconspicuous.
She said that last bit grinning up at Platinum Haze.
You would be surprised,
Haze said as I felt magic wash over me with a familiar burning sensation. In the blink of an eye, we were gone.
Well, wonders never cease,
the mayor said with a half chuckle. The Raptor was an interesting beast to admire, made half of clouds and half of steel. The hallways were skinny and high, designed for vertical passage, not horizontal, and the way I heard it, some only had shafts instead of proper stairs. This one apparently was modified when families of soldiers also lived on it before the war, so kids and perhaps non-Pegasi had been able to travel through it as well. Beyond that, it was mostly Spartan in appearance, with little in the way of decoration or boast beyond the occasional poster espousing the glories of the Enclave. Except the Enclave barely existed anymore. The original Enclave and Daesh were refugees who refused to participate in the mass slaughter of griffins many years before, but the true Enclave persisted above the sky, until recently, to hear Flash tell it. The Enclave came down in force in the north, it was said, only to face such heavy resistance that the High Command was scattered, slaughtered, and the Sky Cities torn asunder when the cloud cover was parted by half. Civil war raged above the sky, it was said, and most of the military might of the Enclave was downed when the sky exploded, save a few Raptors. This was one of the last working Raptors in the world, a final shining reminder of the world that was. It was a shame I was going to have to destroy it. That could wait, though, perhaps a few weeks as I placed everything else where they needed to go. Flare was my first priority, and luckily one of the medical bays was not far away, and was empty. As soon as we entered, Moon Dancer locked the door behind us, and Flash took his brother to the medical table with Rain Dance there to help. The tall, lanky mare looked at us warily for a time before saying,
"How long have you known my uncle?"
That was a good question, though I wasn't sure of the exact time. Months, a few months. I didn't keep track. She didn't seem pleased by this answer, but she was careful to keep a smirk on her lips.
"That's so. How old are you 3 anyway? Old enough to have my cutie mark?"
Serenity said defensively.
60? No, perhaps 70. Or 80.
Haze hummed to herself for a minute before explaining.
It is a complicated question, truly.
20? Odd. What does it matter? I wasn't sure I liked being questioned.
"I'm 17. Are you sure you're only 20-some? You got so many scars. It's cool, but also kind of ugly."
"I've lived an interesting life," I said. It was the only way I could think to explain it, and it was the truth at any rate. If I couldn't claim to have an interesting life, who could?
Truly. I'd wanted to join the army like my sister, but my dad convinced me against it. Now I'm his favorite. Calypso's still bitter about that, but at least she has an interesting life. All I do is paperwork. Better to fight, I say, not be some clerk.
She sighed slightly, but was still smiling.
Every pony says I'm big, too. Or could be. I thought so, too. Figured I was tall and could be beefy if I trained, until I saw you. Doubt I'll ever match what you can bring to the table.
Serenity snorted derisively.
Nobody is stronger than Mama.
You don't want an interesting life, I tried to explain to her. Being strong is good, though. It helps.
You ever kill someone?
She asked bluntly. At the question, Serenity looked away guiltily, and I tried to distract from the fact by speaking back just as bluntly and quickly. Yes, lots of people. It was a bit of an awkward thing to confess to. Lots of ponies. Some of them were trying to kill me, but not all of them. The mare looked at me thoughtfully, as if she were unsure if she should believe me or not. Eventually, she said in a whisper,
Me too.
She gulped a bit, her smile wavering.
Don't tell Daddy. He doesn't know.
I wanted to ask her what happened, how she felt about it, and so many other questions, but I didn't. I'm not sure why she told me, but it wasn't my job to pry. No doubt she just wanted to tell some pony who understood, and I looked the type. I won't.
Uncle Flair knows. He never told either. He made a joke and made me smile and told me to never stop.
She was still smiling.
So don't let him die, so I can keep smiling.
3 times Pegasi knocked on the door to the medical bay trying to get in, and 3 times Flash rebuked them and told them to find another place to go. It was a good thing that Flair's brother was well respected, or else our stupid plan may never have worked. But it did work, and it didn't take long for Flash to properly treat Flair's wounds and get him the blood he needed, though he stayed unconscious for a long time, leaving us waiting impatiently for him to wake. Too long in the end, because a few hours later, the floor beneath me suddenly lurched, causing me to stumble before I found my balance.
What the heck?
The ship was moving. I could feel it just as well as I could feel my own anxiety rising.
Is it that time already?
Flash frowned.
Time for what?
I demanded, leaning against a wall to keep from toppling over. I hated flying.
I had tried to move things along quickly, but we have been scheduled to move. We have learned of a vast cache of supplies, both military and civilian, hidden in the mountain base we used to call our home. We always heard it was haunted, but it seems High Command has decided to ignore those warnings. Half our forces are being sent to secure the rest of the base.
Secure it from who, I wondered, but I already knew the answer. The Steel Rangers had never abandoned their little pet project, even after I gave them the slip, and I gave information on the secret entrances to the building, to the Bloody Hoof, the Hyzai, and even the Watchers. Not to mention they would all have to contend with the facility itself and its 2 glorious overseers, Simpleheart and Baptista. Like it or not, the past would consume them all. This was the last place I wanted to go, but it was exactly where I needed to be. I glanced nervously over at Platinum Haze, thinking of the package she held. Already I could hear the winds whispering to me, but I shook my head to drown them out. They weren't real, just my imagination. But what an imagination it was. Good. How long will it be? I looked down to the floor where Serenity had been napping and decided not to disturb her until the last possible moment.
Good?
Flash seemed unsure.
You better not be planning to take my brother with you on whatever fool mission. He needs to rest.
He started to speak more, but a faint, quiet voice spoke up and the stallion's voice caught in his throat.
Since when did you speak for me?
Flair stirred on the table, slowly starting to sit up only to collapse back down.
I'm fine. Don't worry about me.
Uncle!
The 2 teenagers said in unison, rushing over to hug Flair only for him to bat them away with his remaining wing.
No hugs. It hurts. The wound, not your love. Oh, except your love, Moondancer.
He looked up at her.
Your love is likely to break me. How much have you grown since I last saw you?
The mare blushed prettily.
Enough. Mom says I haven't stopped growing yet. A few years and I'll be as tall as a princess.
She looked over at Platinum Haze with a smirk.
Except that I don't have a horn, which I feel is cheating height-wise.
You have met the lovely Haze. She is such a cheat.
What? We would never.
I don't think she understood the subtleties of teasing.
You stole Hyde's heart, and there's no way to do that fairly.
As Hayes blushed and stammered, trying to think of a good reply, Flair managed to push himself into a proper sitting position. He didn't look back at his wing, so I could only assume he knew.
I see you have met my family. I trust they've all been hospitable. My brother's not much to look at, but at least he is friendly. Says a sack of shit who looks like he had a building fall on him,
Flash said with a smirk.
I did.
That shut his brother right up and brought even more concerned looks from the kids, though Moondancer continued to smirk.
Don't look so bad considering.
He let a pause hang in the air before asking in an even more weary voice,
Where's Dad? On the bridge. See we don't go there.
He didn't need to say more than that.
Are we moving? Where to?
I decided to answer that one.
The facility.
Home, sweet home. It was where the Watchers made me what I was, and where I had intended to destroy them. At least it was the next step to their destruction.
Oh, good. I am sorely in need of a few more hallucinations.
Flair's assembled family shared a confused look, but he didn't bother to explain. It was something you had to experience, and if things kept going the way they were, it was possible they might. I could only hope my peace offering to Simpleheart was enough to make him tone down whatever the fuck he was doing, if that was even possible. There was a chance I was only making things worse.
You got the thing that we needed?
I gave an affirmative nod, which made him smile slightly.
Forgive me for not wanting to go with you. I am sure you can understand my trepidation.
And you're injured, I added.
Faking. I'm a good actor, all to avoid the tunnels. Please forgive me.
How long until you're able to leave? Before Flair could answer, Flash interrupted.
You can't mean to take him away? He is gravely injured. He needs to rest and recuperate, not follow you on some fool's errand. Rest where?
Flair asked with just a hint of venom in his voice.
Not here, surely. I'm a traitor and father would throw me out, which leaves where? The smoking pit that used to be Dice, or the hidden cave the rest of the rebels ran off to when Clear Skies ran us off? There are places we could hide you once we get to the facility. Brother, I love you, really. You're always my favorite, despite your ugly mug. But if I have to choose between you and Hyde for protection, I'll have to choose Hyde.
We can hide in the ruins of Timber, I suggested, trying to push away the memories of how the burnt town had smelled when the Steel Rangers had torched it. No one would look for us there, and it's close to the facility, too. It's a good choice.
A bit depressing, though,
Flair sighed.
But it is a good choice, though we may need to work the decor as we wait.
Before we had a chance to work out the finer details of our plan, a sharp knock on the door helped us make up our minds.
Open the door,
A voice from the other side said.
We know y'all holding outsiders.
Guards. Guards who knew too much. I wasn't sure how. Were there security cameras our host didn't know about, or did one of them give away the game?
Shit.
Flash turned away from the door, grabbed the nearest bed, and shoved it bodily against the door, though I wasn't sure that'd do anything but confuse them.
We need to get out of here.
It was an obvious sentiment, but one I was happy to follow. Without asking for permission, I grabbed Flair with a hoof and threw him onto my back. The medical room had a back door, but I had a sneaking suspicion it was guarded too.
Well, everything is going wrong today, isn't it?
Flair said dryly from my back. It's probably Curly Fry's fault, I said, trying to match his humor. Platinum Haze? I pointed to the back door and she got my meaning. As she moved to the door, I quickly moved over to Serenity and nudged at her. Sweetie, time to go.
What?
The filly rubbed the sleep from her eyes, but when she saw me and the panicked expressions of Flair's extended family, she got the hint well enough.
Okay.
When Hayes opened the door, the room became awash in bolts of green as the guards opened fire, and flashes of purple when the magic slammed into Hayes' shields, creating ripples of light. The Enclave guards looked momentarily confused, and it was just long enough for me to charge them with all my weight, much to Flair's chagrin. I slammed into one, knocking them into and through a cloud wall. The other I just nicked, but they stumbled, and it was enough for Hayes to grab her weapon with magic and toss it aside. Even in full power armor, the guard looked confused when I bashed her with my pitbuck hard enough to crack the glass eyes in her helmet. She went down, dazed. Go, go, go! Platinum Haze was first, followed by Rain Dancer and Moon Dancer, then Serenity with her little pistol out before finally Flash, who had no weapon but a scowl on his face. I followed behind, watching our backs. Faster! I hated the Enclave ship. The walls were clouds some of the time, and metal at other parts. The floor was usually solid, so that was good, but there were enough places where instead of elevators there were just empty shafts. The halls were all too thin, too, designed for Pegasi to fly over each other instead of walk side by side. Altogether, it seemed designed to remind any pony who was not a Pegasi that they didn't belong. This wasn't my place, and just thinking about it made my stomach curl as I remembered just how high up we were. Of course, the worst part was how confusing it all was. Flash had to scream directions as we raced down the halls.
Lift!
Flash yelled, and the whole train took a sharp left just in time for a confused Enclave soldier to stumble out into the hall in front of us. They weren't so confused to not start firing a pistol, though, the bolts whizzing past my ears, singeing my mane.
That almost hit me!
Flair complained loudly from my back as I followed the rest of the group around the corner. "Shut up or I'll hit you!" That seemed to work, because I didn't hear another peep from him.
What's the plan?
Flash asked me as we sped down a corridor. "Get to a sky wagon! Fly to timber! Hide!"
I never wanted to be caught up in your fate, you know.
Flash complained. Flair and him had that in common, the complaining.
We don't have a choice now, Daddy.
Moondancer said as we reached a door at the end of a corridor. Hayes burst through the door, her shield already up, ready to catch bullets, though none shot, which I am sure she was thankful for. The room we entered was by far the largest I had ever seen, a cavernous hall completely devoid of support structure, being made of clouds and all. That made it look expansive beyond my imagining. On the floor were dozens and dozens of ships, ranging from sky wagons to tanks to vertibucks lined up in neat rows. One wall was completely gone, a hole in the world looking out into pure sky and nothing else, which made my stomach lurch even more. Outside, the rain was pouring down even harder, and I saw a crack of lightning out in the distance. Rain Dance took charge, which was nice to see, running past us and over to the nearest sky wagon, which I think was his, and was already strapping himself in by the time we got there. "Get in!" He didn't have to tell me twice. I jumped aboard without question, as did Hayes, Serenity, and Flash. For whatever reason, Moondancer stayed outside, and when Flash tried to object, she just slammed the door in his face.
Stubborn girl, she's gonna get herself killed.
"She can handle herself," I found myself saying, with no real proof. The floor beneath our hooves jerked to life and we started to lift off, but not before I heard shouts from outside. Clearly our escape drew more attention than we had hoped, which was really not a surprise. Flash tried to open the door, but the sky wagon jerked suddenly, sending us all falling, and the big stallion slammed face first into a wall. I could tell we had left the Raptor from the sudden sound of rain pounding on the roof of our cabin.
Stay inside, Daddy.
I heard Moondancer say through the MEW fire that started outside.
I have a gun. I'll protect you. You're not a fighter.
Where did she get a gun?
Flash demanded angrily to a wall.
I know ponies,
Moondancer said defensively as the sky wagon twisted and turned awkwardly under my hooves. She started to say, but cut herself off with a sudden gasp of pain followed by what must have been a war scream. I stumbled my way over to a window of the wagon and stuck my gun out to see if I could help, but the wagon kept twisting and turning, and the Pegasi outside were speeding around too fast for me to get a decent shot. Though at one point an Enclave bastard happened close enough that I could spray a gout of flame out the window. The pony was unharmed but screamed in shock, giving Rain Dance enough time to turn the wagon, swiftly sending it crashing into the Pegasi with such a forceful jolt that I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. Before I could get my senses back, the wagon took a sudden dive, sending me stumbling toward the front of the cabin, and then a sudden rise so steep that I slid backwards, slamming into the rear wall with enough force that I heard something, either me or the wall, crack from the force. Then there was a sharp turn that sent me stumbling towards the window hard enough that somehow my head got forced out, which was good because the rocking was upsetting my stomach and I found myself retching. Unfortunately, I missed the Enclave pony who was flying right below me. Thunder cracked as the ride calmed down just long enough for me to get my bearings. I looked back and saw Hayes grabbing onto a seat with her wing, her face looking paler than I had ever seen it, and Serenity was hanging onto her mane for dear life. Flash was stumbling back toward the door, looking more annoyed than anything, while Flair, who must have fallen off my back at some point, was lying on the ground beside me laughing, though I didn't get the joke. He might have tried to tell me, but I couldn't hear him over the shouts and gunfire and rain. I hated flying. I got the chance to hate it more when Rain Dance decided that he had to do a loop to escape our pursuers. One second I had all four hooves on the ground, the next I had to jab my sword into the wall of the cabin to keep myself from falling, leaving me dangling by one hoof while holding Flare with the other. We flew upside down like that for what felt like minutes, but was probably just a few seconds.
I thought I'd never fly upside down again.
Flare thought the whole thing was a game, and I was sorely tempted to let him go or throw up on him. Instead, I laughed too and said, I rode a dragon like this once. Though with the dragon it was higher and scarier, and I nearly broke my cybernetic sword leg thing right off. Mercifully, the wagon started to right itself. But then lightning flashed outside, suddenly and violently, and we started to dive. Rain! Rain! I heard Moondancer shout. And we kept diving, longer and longer. I looked out the window and saw blackened buildings rapidly approaching through the heavy rain. It was then I realized something had gone very dramatically wrong. At the last second, the cabin jerked and I felt like I was floating in midair, weightless. But it was too little, too late, as the ground came up to meet us with a devastating crack. Blackness. I don't know how long I was out, lying amidst the broken buildings and broken ponies. A minute, an hour, a day. It was still light out, and rain was falling gently on my head, so it couldn't have been that long. Or could it? How could I tell? Everything was spinning. The whole world felt like a painting, unreal. I saw my friends laying, and there were cries or screams. Blood. I smelled blood, that was certain. And smoke. Smells of pain and suffering all around. Or maybe I imagined them. I closed my eyes and opened them again. How long had passed? The cries had died down. Was I even in the same place as before? It looked like the same painting, but something was off. Oh, there was a pony standing above me, a marked change in the landscape. Power armor. Even in my delirious state I could recognize it. I panicked and started to move when the figure placed a gentle red hoof on me. Red, not Enclave. It wasn't Enclave. Steel Rangers? That could be worse, but something was weird. The color wasn't right. The pony didn't have a mask on. I could see her face. No, his face. I thought for a second that it was Blackwater, the Steel Ranger that kidnapped me before. But she wasn't pink. And she never had a drooping green mustache either.
Level up. Skill note, Sneak, 85. New perk. Your ability to consistently get beat up has granted you even more life. I don't know how this works, so you shouldn't ask, but it gives you an instant increase of 30 hit points.